My name is Erica, and I have always been the family disappointment. At least that is what my older brother Marcus believes. While he drives a gleaming black BMW sedan and lives in a house that could grace the cover of Architectural Digest, I puttered around town in a beat-up 2004 Honda Civic with rust spots decorating the wheel wells like abstract art. The engine wheezed when I pressed the accelerator, and the air conditioning had given up the ghost 3 summers ago. But that rusty Honda was about to teach my brother the most expensive lesson of his life. The tension between Marcus and me had been building for years, but it reached a breaking point at our cousin Jennifer's wedding reception last Saturday evening. The celebration took place at the prestigious Magnolia Country Club, where crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk. Family members I had not seen in months gathered around the bar sharing stories and catching up on each other's lives. Marcus had arrived in his latest acquisition, a midnight blue BMW X-Sensvin that probably cost more than most people make in a year. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his success as the owner of Premier BMW, the largest luxury car dealership in 3 counties. Everything about him screamed prosperity, from his platinum watch to his perfectly styled hair. I had pulled into the parking lot 20 minutes after him, my Honda coughing and sputtering as I searched for a parking space far from the main entrance. The contrast between our vehicles could not have been more stark. His gleaming SUV sat near the front entrance like a monument to achievement, while my car looked like it belonged in a salvage yard. The confrontation happened near the dessert table where our elderly Aunt Florence was admiring the wedding cake. Marcus approached me with that familiar expression of barely contained irritation that I had grown accustomed to over the years. "Erica, we need to talk," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "That piece of junk you drove here tonight is absolutely mortifying. Do you have any idea how it reflects on our family when you show up to events like this, looking like you just crawled out of a trailer park?" Several family members turned to stare as his voice rose above the gentle murmur of conversation. I felt heat creep up my neck as cousins and aunts pretended not to listen while clearly hanging on every word. "It gets me where I need to go," I replied quietly, hoping to diffuse the situation before it escalated further. "That rusty Honda is embarrassing our family," Marcus shouted, abandoning any pretense of discretion. "Get a real car or do not come around anymore. I am tired of making excuses for your complete lack of ambition and self-respect." The reception fell silent around us. Even the string quartet seemed to pause mid-note as every eye in the room focused on our family drama unfolding near the chocolate fountain. Our cousin Jennifer, radiant in her wedding gown, shot us a look that could have frozen champagne. I set down my untouched slice of cake and walked toward the exit without saying another word. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my car keys, partly from embarrassment and partly from the familiar sting of being judged by someone who claimed to love me. Marcus followed me into the parking lot, his anger apparently not yet satisfied. "Where do you think you are going? I am not finished talking to you." "I think you have said enough for one evening," I replied, starting my Honda's reluctant engine. The car wheezed to life after 3 attempts, which only seemed to fuel Marcus's fury. "Look at that pathetic excuse for transportation," he sneered. "You are 32 years old, Erica. When are you going to grow up and start acting like an adult?" I backed out of the parking space without responding, but Marcus was not ready to let the conversation end. He climbed into his BMW and followed me as I pulled onto Maple Street, then continued tailing me through downtown Springfield and onto the highway leading toward the residential areas on the north side of town. For 15 minutes, his headlights filled my rearview mirror as we drove through increasingly upscale neighborhoods. I could imagine him planning his next verbal assault, probably preparing to lecture me about responsibility and success and all the ways I had disappointed our late parents. What Marcus did not know was that I had been keeping secrets from my family for the past 5 years. Big secrets. The kind that would fundamentally change how he viewed not just me, but everything he thought he understood about success, ambition, and the true meaning of wealth. As I turned into the entrance of Willowbrook Estates, where manicured lawns stretched between houses that started at $2 million, I watched Marcus's BMW slow down behind me. Through my mirror, I could see his confusion as I approached the electronic gate and entered my personal access code. The massive iron gate swung open, and I drove through without looking back. Marcus followed, his bewilderment growing with each passing moment as we wound through streets lined with sprawling mansions set back behind perfectly landscaped gardens. He had expected to follow me to some cramped apartment complex or modest rental house that would confirm his assumptions about my financial situation. Instead, he found himself driving through one of the most exclusive residential communities in the entire state, where tech executives and professional athletes lived behind privacy walls and security systems. When I pulled into the circular driveway of a Georgian colonial mansion with columns that reached toward a second-story balcony, Marcus sat in his car for a full minute before getting out. The house rose 3 stories above perfectly manicured grounds, with professional landscape lighting illuminating mature oak trees and formal garden beds. "Whose house is this?" he demanded as he approached my car. "Are you house-sitting for some wealthy client? What kind of game are you playing, Erica?" I climbed out of my Honda without answering and walked toward the 4-car garage attached to the east wing of the house. Marcus trailed behind me, his earlier anger replaced by complete bafflement as he tried to process what he was seeing. "This is my home," I said, simply reaching for the garage door remote clipped to my sun visor. "I bought it 3 years ago." Marcus stared at me as if I had claimed to be the Queen of England. "That is impossible. You drive that piece of junk and work as some kind of freelance writer. There is no way you could afford a place like this." I pressed the button on the remote, and the first garage door began to rise with a quiet, mechanical hum. As fluorescent lights flickered on, automatically illuminating the interior of the garage, Marcus took a step forward and then froze completely. His mouth fell open as he stared into the space where most people would park their daily drivers and store lawn equipment and holiday decorations. Inside my garage sat 4 of the most beautiful automobiles Marcus had ever seen, outside of a museum or high-end auction house. The concrete floor gleamed like polished marble, and professional lighting showcased each vehicle as if it were a priceless work of art. Closest to the door sat a pristine 1967 Shelby Cobra, its racing blue paint so deep and lustrous it seemed to glow under the overhead lights. The chrome exhaust pipes gleamed like mirrors, and the leather interior looked as though it had just rolled off the assembly line in Detroit decades ago. Next to the Cobra rested a 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing, its iconic doors open like silver wings reaching toward the ceiling. The car's metallic paint caught the light and threw it back in dancing patterns across the garage walls. Even Marcus, who sold luxury vehicles for a living, recognized this as one of the most sought-after classics in the automotive world. The third vehicle was a 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda in bright orange with matte black racing stripes. Its aggressive stance and powerful lines spoke of raw American muscle, while the chrome bumpers and pristine paint job testified to countless hours of meticulous restoration work. Finally positioned like the crown jewel of the collection sat a 1963 Jaguar E-Type Roadster in British racing green. The car's sensuous curves and wire wheels embodied everything beautiful about automotive design, while its flawless finish suggested it had been restored by true masters of the craft. Marcus stood motionless for nearly 2 minutes, his eyes moving from one vehicle to another as his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. These were not just classic cars. These were museum-quality restorations worth hundreds of thousands of dollars each. How was all he managed to say? I parked my Honda in the empty 4th bay next to a workbench lined with precision tools and specialized equipment. The contrast between my daily driver and the pristine classics was intentional and meaningful in ways Marcus could not yet understand. "I have been collecting and restoring these for the past 8 years. I explained, running my hand along the Cobra's perfect fender. I buy cars that other people consider hopeless and bring them back to life. Marcus moved closer to the Mercedes, his trained eye recognizing the quality of the restoration work. The chrome was perfect, the paint was flawless, and every detail had been attended to with obsessive precision. "Do you have any idea what these are worth?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Gullwing is valued at $420,000. I replied matter-of-factly. "The Cobra is worth about $380,000. The E-Type appraised at $210,000 last month, and the Cuda is worth roughly $160,000 depending on market conditions." Marcus did quick math in his head, arriving at a total that exceeded $1 million. He stared at me as if seeing a stranger wearing his sister's face. "But you drive that beat-up Honda," he said, gesturing toward my practical daily driver. "You live like you do not have two nickels to rub together. Appearances can be deceiving," I said, opening the hood of the Cobra to reveal the immaculate engine bay. Every component had been restored or replaced to exact specifications, from the period-correct air cleaner to the custom exhaust headers that had been ceramic-coated for both performance and longevity. Marcus leaned in to examine the engine, his years of automotive experience, allowing him to appreciate the craftsmanship involved in such a restoration. The attention to detail was extraordinary, far beyond anything he had seen in his dealership or at car shows. "This is professional-level work," he admitted reluctantly. "Who did the restoration?" "I did," I replied, pulling a soft cloth from my pocket to polish away a fingerprint on the chrome valve cover. "Every bolt, every gasket, every piece of trim. I rebuilt the engine myself, fabricated custom parts when originals were not available, and mixed the paint to match original factory specifications." Marcus straightened up and stared at me with an expression of complete confusion. The sister he thought he knew was a struggling freelance writer who could barely afford basic transportation. The woman standing before him possessed technical skills and financial resources that challenged everything he believed about success and achievement. "Where did you learn to do this kind of work?" he asked. "From Grandpa Joe," I said simply. "You were too young to remember, but I spent every summer with him from age 12 to 18, learning everything he knew about automotive restoration. He taught me to see beyond rust and dents to the beauty underneath." Marcus's expression shifted as distant memories began to surface. Our grandfather had indeed been passionate about old cars, though Marcus had been only 8 years old when the old man passed away. He remembered a cluttered garage filled with mysterious tools and car parts, but he had never understood the significance of what their grandfather was trying to preserve. "Grandpa Joe worked on junk," Marcus said dismissively, "old cars that nobody wanted." "Grandpa Joe worked on classics before people knew they were classics," I corrected him. "He taught me that every car has a story, and with enough patience and skill, you can help that story continue." I opened a cabinet mounted on the garage wall and pulled out a leather-bound journal filled with detailed notes and photographs. The pages contained restoration tips, supplier contacts, and technical specifications that would be worth thousands of dollars to the right collector. He left me his notes and his tools. I explained handing the journal to Marcus. More importantly, he taught me to look beyond surface appearances and recognize true value. Marcus flipped through pages of meticulous handwriting and detailed sketches, beginning to understand that their grandfather had possessed knowledge and skills far beyond what anyone in the family had realized. "But this collection must be worth over $1 million, he said, gesturing around the garage. "How could you afford to buy these cars in the first place?" "I started small," I replied, walking over to a framed photograph hanging on the wall. The picture showed a rusty-dented 1968 Mustang sitting in a junkyard, barely recognizable as an automobile. "This was my first project. I bought it for $800 from a scrapyard in Tennessee." Next to the before picture hung an after photo of the same car, now restored to pristine condition, with gleaming paint and perfect chrome. The transformation was so complete that the two images seemed to show entirely different vehicles. I spent 18 months restoring that Mustang in a rented garage space. I continued. When I finished, a collector in California paid me $63,000 for it. That became the seed money for my next project and then the next. Marcus studied the photographs, trying to reconcile the wreck in the first image with the beautiful car in the second. The level of transformation seemed almost impossible, yet the evidence hung right in front of him. "You've been doing this for 8 years, he asked. "Full-time for the past 5 years, I confirmed. Before that, it was evenings and weekends while I built up my reputation and client base. Client base. I smiled at his confusion. Marcus, this garage represents my personal collection. The cars I restore for paying customers are a completely different business. Marcus followed me through a door connecting the garage to what he had assumed was a workshop or storage area. Instead, he found himself in a professional office space, complete with drafting tables, computer workstations, and walls lined with automotive reference books and technical manuals. 3 large monitors displayed different aspects of my business operations. One screen showed a detailed restoration timeline for 6 different projects currently in progress. Another displayed financial spreadsheets tracking parts, orders, labor costs, and projected completion dates. The third monitor showed photographs and documentation for completed projects, each accompanied by sale prices that made Marcus blink in surprise. "Welcome to Classic Revival Automotive," I said, settling into a leather chair behind a mahogany desk that would not have looked out of place in a corporate boardroom. "I own and operate 7 restoration facilities across 4 states, employing 23 full-time craftsmen and specialists." Marcus sank into a visitor's chair, his earlier confidence completely shattered. 7 facilities! The flagship shop is here in Springfield, where I handle the most valuable and complex projects personally, I explained, pulling up a map on one of the monitors. Red pins marked locations in Illinois, Missouri, Tennessee, and Texas, each representing a facility specializing in different aspects of automotive restoration. The Missouri location focuses on muscle cars from the 1960s and 70s. I continued clicking on each pin to reveal facility details. Tennessee handles European classics, particularly British sports cars and German luxury vehicles. Texas specializes in pre-war American automobiles and custom hot rods. Each facility employed between 2 and 5 master craftsmen, along with apprentices, learning traditional restoration techniques that were rapidly disappearing from the automotive world. The network allowed me to take on multiple complex projects simultaneously while maintaining the quality standards that had built my reputation. "What kind of projects are we talking about?" Marcus asked, leaning forward to study the monitor displaying current work orders. I clicked through a series of folders, each containing detailed documentation for vehicles in various stages of restoration. A 1954 Ferrari 250 GT was receiving a complete engine rebuild in Tennessee. A 1937 Bugatti Type 57 was undergoing bodywork in Missouri. 3 different Porsche 911 models from the 1970s were being restored to concours condition at the Texas facility. Last month, we completed restoration on a 1963 Ferrari 250 GTO for a collector in Switzerland, I said, opening a folder containing before and after photographs. He paid us $2.8 million for 18 months of work. Marcus stared at the screen showing a price that exceeded the annual revenue of his entire dealership. $2.8 million for one car. The car was worth $12 million when we finished, I replied. Our client was thrilled with the investment. Quality restoration on rare classics is not an expense. It is an appreciation strategy. I pulled up a financial summary showing my business's performance over the past 3 years. Revenue had grown from $1.6 million in year 1 to $4.7 million in the most recent fiscal year. Profit margins averaged 68%, far higher than the thin margins typical in Marcus's new car sales business. We specialize in what other shops consider impossible projects. I explained opening another file containing photographs of vehicles that looked more like scrap metal than automobiles. Insurance companies declare these cars total losses, but we see them as opportunities to preserve automotive history. One particularly dramatic before and after comparison showed a 1967 Camaro that had been buried under a collapsed barn for 30 years. Water damage, rust, and structural damage had destroyed 90% of the original car. The after photo revealed a concours quality restoration that had won Best in Class at the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance. The insurance company paid the owner $18,000 for that Camaro as scraps, I said. We bought it from him for $25,000 and spent 8 months rebuilding it from the frame up. A collector in Japan paid us $460,000 for the finished car. Marcus shook his head in amazement. How do you find these projects? Network and reputation. I replied, opening my email client to reveal dozens of messages from potential clients, auction houses, and fellow collectors. I have contacts at insurance companies, salvage yards, estate sale companies, and auction houses across the country. When something special turns up, I usually get the first call. I showed him correspondence from auction houses like Barrett Jackson and R.M. Sotheby's, requesting my services for high-profile restoration projects. Museums and private collectors regularly contacted me for authenticity verification and restoration advice. The automotive collector community is surprisingly small, I explained. Word travels fast when someone does quality work, and it travels even faster when someone does poor work. Reputation is everything in this business. Marcus studied emails from clients with names he recognized from business magazines and entertainment industry publications. Tech executives, professional athletes, and entertainment industry figures all sought my services for their classic car collections. But why keep it secret from the family? He asked. Why not tell us about your success? I leaned back in my chair, considering how to explain years of complicated emotions and family dynamics. Do you remember how Dad always talked about wanting to restore that old Chevelle in the barn? Marcus nodded slowly. Their father had owned a 1969 Chevelle SS that had been his pride and joy in high school, but marriage and children had pushed the restoration project to the bottom of his priority list. The car had sat under a tarp in their grandfather's barn for 20 years, slowly deteriorating while life got in the way of dreams. After Dad died, you sold that car to a scrap dealer for $300, I said quietly. You told me it was worthless junk taking up space. The accusation hung in the air between us. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair as the memory surfaced. He had been dealing with estate issues and funeral arrangements focused on practical matters rather than sentimental attachments to old cars. I did not know you wanted it, he said defensively. I offered to buy it from the estate, I reminded him. You laughed and said I was wasting money on worthless scrap metal just like Grandpa Joe had done. Marcus fell silent, remembering the conversation differently but unable to deny the pain in my voice. He had been so focused on moving forward and building his own success that he had dismissed my interests as impractical nostalgia. That Chevelle would be worth $200,000 today if it had been properly restored, I continued. Dad's car is sitting in someone else's garage now, or maybe it was crushed for scrap metal years ago. Either way, it is gone forever. The weight of that loss hung between us as Marcus began to understand how his dismissive attitude had shaped my decision to keep my success private. I had built an empire based on preserving automotive history, while he had casually discarded a piece of our family's history without a second thought. I started keeping my business quiet because I did not want to deal with skepticism and lectures about practicality, I admitted. I wanted to prove that Grandpa Joe's teachings had value before I had to defend them to people who would never understand. Marcus looked around the professional office space, taking in the evidence of a successful enterprise built on principles he had always dismissed as hobbies. The irony was unmistakable. While he sold mass-produced luxury cars to people who valued status over substance, I had built a business preserving irreplaceable pieces of automotive art. "How many people know about this?" he asked. "In the family, just me," I replied. "Professionally, I am well known in classic car circles, but I prefer to let my work speak for itself rather than seeking publicity." Marcus pulled out his phone and searched for my business name online. Within seconds, he was staring at a website showcasing dozens of award-winning restorations, client testimonials from prominent collectors, and features in major automotive publications. "Before I show you something else," I said, rising from my desk chair, "I need to tell you about the inheritance that changed everything." Marcus looked up from his phone where he had been scrolling through photographs of my completed restoration projects. Each image showed transformations that seemed to border on the miraculous, turning rust-covered hulks into pristine examples of automotive artistry. I walked to a fireproof safe built into the office wall and entered a digital combination. The heavy door swung open to reveal documents, photographs, and a leather-wrapped package that looked decades old. When Grandpa Joe died, he left specific instructions with his lawyer. I began carefully removing the package from the safe. This was to be given to whichever grandchild showed genuine interest in his work and possessed the patience to learn traditional restoration techniques. The package contained a collection of items that Marcus had never seen before. There were hand-drawn technical diagrams showing body panel fabrication techniques used by coach builders in the 1930s. Detailed notes described paint mixing formulas that had been closely guarded secrets of European restoration masters. Most importantly, there were photographs and documentation for a collection of rare automotive parts that Grandpa Joe had accumulated over 50 years of working on luxury cars. Grandpa worked on cars for some of the wealthiest families in the state back in the 40s and 50s. I explained, spreading the photographs across my desk. The Vanderbilts, the Astors, even a few Hollywood celebrities who summered here. When those families upgraded to newer cars, Grandpa often bought their old vehicles or acquired spare parts and restoration materials. Marcus examined photographs showing their grandfather working on vehicles that were now worth millions of dollars. A 1937 Cord 812 supercharged, a 1953 Jaguar XK 120 Roadster, a 1948 Tucker Torpedo, one of only 51 ever built. I had no idea he worked on cars like these. Marcus admitted studying a picture of their grandfather adjusting the carburetor on what appeared to be a Duesenberg Model J. Most of the family thought he was just a mechanic who worked on old cars, I replied. But Grandpa was actually one of the most skilled restoration specialists in the Midwest. He learned techniques from European craftsmen who immigrated to America after the First World War. I opened another folder containing correspondence between their grandfather and parts suppliers, restoration shops, and collectors from across the country. The letters revealed a network of relationships and knowledge that had taken decades to build. When wealthy families decided their classic cars were outdated, Grandpa often arranged to purchase the vehicles for restoration and resale. I continued. But he also bought spare parts, tools, and materials whenever they became available. He knew that someday those parts would be impossible to find. Marcus looked up from a letter discussing the sale of a 1936 Auburn Speedster. "What happened to all those parts?" I smiled and led him through another door into a climate-controlled storage room that stretched for 30 feet along the back wall of my property. Shelves reached from floor to ceiling, holding thousands of carefully cataloged automotive components. Engine parts for luxury cars from the 1920s through 1950s filled custom-built wooden boxes. Chrome trim pieces hung on padded hooks to prevent scratching. Rare electrical components rested in protective cases lined with anti-static materials. This represents 50 years of collecting by someone who understood that automotive history was disappearing. I explained pulling out a box containing a complete set of pistons and connecting rods for a Duesenberg straight-8 engine. These parts are worth more than most new cars today. Marcus held one of the pistons, feeling its substantial weight and admiring the precision machining that had been accomplished with 1920s technology. The part looked as though it had been manufactured yesterday rather than nearly a century ago. Grandpa Joe left detailed documentation for everything in this collection. I said, showing Marcus a series of ledger books containing part numbers, compatibility information, and estimated values. He knew that someday someone would need these pieces to complete historically significant restorations. Each entry in the ledgers included not just technical specifications, but also provenance information tracing the part's history back to specific vehicles and original owners. This documentation was crucial for authenticating high-value restorations and ensuring that rare cars maintained their historical accuracy. The inheritance also included something else, I said, returning to the safe and removing a final item. Grandpa's master journal containing restoration techniques that were never written down anywhere else. The journal was a thick leather-bound volume filled with hundreds of pages of handwritten notes, sketches, and technical diagrams. It contained formulas for mixing paints to match original factory specifications, techniques for fabricating replacement parts using traditional methods, and detailed procedures for rebuilding engines and transmissions that were no longer supported by modern manufacturers. Some of these techniques were trade secrets passed down through generations of European craftsmen. I explained, opening to a page showing detailed sketches for hand-forming aluminum body panels. When Grandpa learned them in the 40s and 50s, he was one of only a handful of Americans who possessed this knowledge. Marcus studied the intricate diagrams and precise handwriting, beginning to understand the true value of what their grandfather had preserved. These were not just restoration notes, but a comprehensive guide to craftsmanship techniques that would otherwise have been lost forever. This journal is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to the right collector, I said. But more importantly, it represents a connection to automotive history that money cannot buy. Grandpa Joe understood that cars are not just transportation. They are expressions of human creativity and engineering excellence. I closed the journal carefully and returned it to the safe. He left this inheritance to me because I was the only family member who showed interest in learning what he had to teach. You and your friends thought his work was just a hobby for an old man who could not let go of the past. Marcus felt the sting of truth in my words. He remembered dismissing their grandfather's garage as cluttered and outdated, filled with junk that belonged in a scrapyard. He had never taken the time to understand the knowledge and passion that Grandpa Joe was trying to share. I was young, Marcus said quietly. I did not understand. I was younger, but I paid attention, I replied. Every summer, I learned something new about automotive history restoration techniques and the importance of preserving beautiful things instead of simply discarding them when they become inconvenient. The weight of missed opportunities hung heavy in the air between us. Marcus had spent years building a business, selling new cars to people who would trade them in for newer models within a few years. I had built a business preserving automotive masterpieces that would be treasured for generations. Is it too late? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Could I still learn these things? I looked at my brother, seeing genuine remorse in his expression for the first time in years. Grandpa always said that the most important qualification for restoration work was not skill or knowledge, but respect for what you are trying to preserve. Marcus nodded slowly, beginning to understand that our conversation was about much more than cars or business success. It was about family legacy, respect for craftsmanship, and the difference between building something lasting versus simply making money. There is something else you need to see, I said, leading him back toward the garage. Something that will help you understand why I have been so committed to keeping Grandpa Joe's work alive. In the corner of the garage, covered by a custom-fitted car cover, sat a shape that Marcus had not noticed during his initial shock at seeing my collection. I carefully pulled away the cover to reveal a 1969 Chevelle SS in primer gray, its body panels perfectly aligned but waiting for final paint and assembly. Marcus stared at the car in recognition and disbelief. "That is Dad's car." "I bought it back," I said simply. It took me 3 years to track down who purchased it from the scrap dealer, and another 2 years to convince them to sell it to me. Most of the original parts were gone, but I have been rebuilding it using period-correct components from Grandpa's collection. Marcus walked around the car, recognizing details that he remembered from childhood. The distinctive stripe pattern, the rally wheels that their father had been so proud of, even the small dent in the rear quarter panel where Marcus had backed into a tree while learning to drive. "Why?" he asked. "Because it represents something important to our family," I replied. "Dad never got the chance to restore this car, but I can finish what he started. When I am done, it will be exactly as he envisioned it in all those years he spent planning the project." Marcus reached out to touch the smooth primer surface, remembering afternoons when their father would sit in the barn talking about his plans for the restoration. Chrome bumpers, a rebuilt engine, fresh paint in the original rally green color. It had been his dream project, always scheduled for next year when time and money would allow. "I've been working on it for 18 months, I continued. "The engine is completely rebuilt with performance upgrades that Dad would have loved. The interior will be restored to original specifications, using leather and materials that match the factory options. When it is finished, it will be better than new." Marcus understood that this project represented something far more significant than automotive restoration. It was an act of love, respect, and family healing that he had never imagined possible. Marcus pulled out his phone again, this time searching more specifically for my name in connection with automotive restoration. What he found made him stop walking entirely. "You're on the cover of Classic Car magazine," he said, staring at his screen in disbelief. I glanced at his phone, where the August issue displayed a photograph of me standing next to a 1958 Ferrari 250 Testarossa that I had spent 14 months restoring for a collector in Monaco. The headline read, "Master Restorer, How Erica Thompson Saves Automotive History, One Classic at a Time." That was a challenging project. I admitted remembering the countless hours spent fabricating replacement body panels for the rare Ferrari. The car had been in a fire in the 1970s, and most people thought it was beyond saving. Marcus scrolled through the digital version of the article, reading quotes from prominent collectors and auction house experts who praised my technical expertise and attention to historical accuracy. Barrett Jackson's president called my work the gold standard for concours-level restoration. A curator from the Peterson Automotive Museum described me as one of the most knowledgeable restoration specialists in North America. "Listen to this," Marcus said, reading aloud from the article. "Thompson's reputation for authenticity and quality has made her the go-to specialist for collectors seeking to restore the world's rarest automobiles. Her waiting list currently extends 3 years, with projects valued in excess of $25 million. He looked up at me with an expression of complete bewilderment. 3-year waiting list. I only take on projects that genuinely interest me. I explained, leading him back toward the office area. At this point in my career, I can afford to be selective about the vehicles I choose to restore. I showed him a thick binder containing restoration proposals for dozens of potential projects. Each proposal included detailed photographs, historical research, and cost estimates for bringing rare automobiles back to concours condition. Many of the estimates exceeded $500,000 for a single vehicle. This 1937 Talbot Lago T150C SS Teardrop Coupe belongs to a collector in France. I said, opening to a proposal that included stunning photographs of one of the most beautiful cars ever designed. He wants me to perform a complete restoration, but the project would take 18 months and cost $800,000. Marcus studied photographs of the elegant French coupe, its flowing lines embodying the pinnacle of 1930s automotive design. Even in its current deteriorated condition, the car's beauty was unmistakable. "Are you going to take the project?" he asked. "I have not decided yet," I replied. "The car is historically significant and absolutely gorgeous, but I have 3 other projects of similar importance already scheduled. I may refer him to one of the specialists I trained in Europe." Marcus flipped through more proposals, each representing automotive treasures worth millions of dollars. A 1954 Mercedes-Benz W196-300 SLR Uhlenhaut Coupe, a 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, a 1936 Bugatti Type 57 SC Atlantic. These were not just rare cars, they were automotive legends that belonged in museums. "How did you become the person that collectors trust with cars this valuable?" Marcus asked. I opened another folder containing magazine articles and newspaper features that chronicled my rise to prominence in the classic car world. The progression was clear: small local projects in automotive trade publications, followed by features in national magazines, and finally international recognition as a master craftsman. "It started with that first Mustang I showed you earlier," I said, pointing to the before and after photographs hanging on the wall. A writer from Hemmings Motor News saw the car at a local show and wrote a feature article about the restoration. That led to inquiries from collectors who had similar projects. The early articles showed my work on relatively common classics like Mustangs, Camaros, and Corvettes. But even these early restorations demonstrated an attention to detail and historical accuracy that set them apart from typical restoration work. Each successful project led to referrals for more challenging vehicles. I continued showing Marcus a timeline of increasingly significant restorations. Collectors talked to each other, and word spread that I could handle projects other shops would not touch. By the third year of my business, I was working on Porsches and Jaguars for collectors who demanded absolute authenticity. My reputation for research and attention to detail attracted clients who owned vehicles with documented racing history or celebrity provenance. This 1963 Corvette Grand Sport was owned by a professional driver who raced it at Sebring and Daytona. I said, showing Marcus documentation for a restoration that had taken 8 months to complete. The owner wanted it restored to exact race specifications, including period-correct safety equipment and engine modifications. The challenge of such projects required not just mechanical expertise, but extensive historical research to ensure that every detail matched original specifications. I spent weeks studying period photographs, racing records, and technical documentation to verify the authenticity of each component. "The automotive collector community is very small," I explained. "When you do quality work on historically significant vehicles, your reputation spreads quickly through word of mouth. The most important collectors only trust their cars to specialists who have proven they can maintain historical accuracy while achieving concours-level quality." Marcus found an article from Automobile Quarterly that featured my restoration of a 1938 Talbot Lago T150C SS Figoni at Falaschi Cabriolet. The car had been displayed at the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance, where it won Best in Class against competition from the world's finest restoration shops. "You competed against shops that have been doing this for 50 years, Marcus observed, reading the article's description of the judging process. "Experience matters, but so does genuine passion for automotive history," I replied. "Many shops focus primarily on making cars look beautiful for shows. I focus on preserving authentic details that tell the story of how each car was originally built and used." The difference was evident in the level of research and documentation that accompanied each of my restorations. While other shops might use modern materials and techniques to achieve visual appeal, I invested time and effort to locate original components or fabricate replacements using period-correct methods. This level of authenticity is especially important for cars with racing history or celebrity ownership. I explained, showing Marcus documentation for a 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR that had been driven by Sterling Moss in the Mille Miglia. These vehicles are pieces of history, not just transportation. Every detail must be absolutely correct to preserve their historical significance. Marcus scrolled through more articles, finding features in publications he'd never heard of, but which clearly represented the pinnacle of automotive journalism. Road and Track, Classic and Sports Car, Octane magazine and Haggerty magazine had all featured my work prominently. How many people actually read these magazines? Marcus asked. The circulation numbers are not huge, I admitted. But the readers are exactly the collectors who buy million-dollar classics at auction. When Haggerty magazine features your work, every serious collector in the world sees it. I showed him auction results from recent sales where vehicles I had restored commanded premium prices, specifically because of the quality and authenticity of the restoration work. A 1967 Shelby Cobra that I had restored sold for $400,000 more than similar examples because of the documentation and attention to detail that accompanied the project. Auction houses specifically mention my work in their lot descriptions. I said opening a Barrett-Jackson catalog that featured 2 of my restorations. That attribution adds significant value to the vehicles because collectors know they can trust the quality and authenticity. Marcus studied the auction descriptions, which read more like museum catalog entries than typical car sale advertisements. Every aspect of each restoration was documented and verified, from the provenance of individual components to the historical significance of specific design details. This is a completely different world from selling new cars. Marcus admitted beginning to understand the level of expertise and reputation required to succeed in the classic car market. The customers are different too, I said. These are people who collect automotive art, not just transportation. They understand craftsmanship and are willing to pay for authentic preservation of automotive history. Marcus found an interview in which a prominent collector explained why he chose my shop for $1 million restoration project. The collector emphasized my reputation for research, attention to detail, and commitment to historical accuracy above considerations of cost or timeline. When you are restoring a car worth several $1 million, the collector was quoted as saying, "You want to work with someone who understands that they are preserving a piece of history, not just fixing an old car." Marcus, I said, walking to a filing cabinet and retrieving a leather portfolio. I think it is time you understood the complete picture of what I have built here. I handed him my most recent financial statements prepared by the same accounting firm that handled several Fortune 500 companies. The numbers on the pages made Marcus sit down heavily in the nearest chair. Gross revenue last year was $4.7 million, I said matter-of-factly. After expenses including payroll for 23 full-time employees, facility overhead, and materials costs, net profit was $3.2 million. Marcus stared at the profit and loss statement as if it were written in a foreign language. His BMW dealership, despite employing 47 people and occupying a facility worth $8 million, had generated only $1.9 million in gross profit the previous year. "Your profit margin is 68%, Marcus said slowly, double-checking his calculations. "That is impossible in the automotive industry. It is possible when you provide specialized services that cannot be replicated by mass-market competitors." I explained, showing him a breakdown of individual project revenues. This 1954 Ferrari 375 mm Spider restoration generated $840,000 in revenue. The direct costs were $210,000, leaving a gross margin of 75%. Marcus examined the project details, noting that the 8-month restoration had required only 2 full-time craftsmen, plus my personal supervision. The customer had provided the vehicle and paid for all parts and materials, while my company provided expertise, labor, and facilities. New car dealerships operate on margins of 3 to 5%, Marcus said, comparing his business model to mine. "We have to sell enormous volumes just to cover overhead costs." "Classic car restoration is the opposite," I replied. "Low volume, high expertise, premium pricing. Each project is unique and requires specialized knowledge that takes years to develop." I showed him financial projections for the coming year, which included confirmed contracts worth over $6 million in gross revenue. The projects ranged from a complete restoration of a 1936 Auburn Speedster to authenticity consulting for a major automotive museum. This Duesenberg Model J restoration will take 14 months and generate $1.4 million in revenue. I said, opening a contract that had been signed just 2 weeks earlier. The customer is providing a budget of $300,000 for parts and materials while we provide labor and expertise. Marcus calculated, quickly realizing that the single Duesenberg project would generate more profit than his dealership typically made in 6 months. The fundamental economics were completely different from anything he had experienced in the automotive industry. "How do you find customers willing to pay these prices?" Marcus asked. "They find me," I replied simply. "At this level of the market, there are only a handful of shops in the entire world capable of handling the most significant restoration projects. Collectors with million-dollar vehicles do not shop around for the lowest bid." I pulled up a client database containing contact information for over 200 collectors' museums and automotive institutions worldwide. The list included technology executives, entertainment industry figures, professional athletes, and members of European nobility who collected rare automobiles. This client owns 14 Ferrari classics worth a combined $38 million. I said, clicking on a file containing photographs of an extraordinary collection. He has been sending vehicles to my shops for restoration work for the past 4 years. The client's restoration history showed 7 completed projects totaling over $2 million in revenue. Each project had been completed on schedule and within budget, leading to additional referrals within his collector network. "Satisfied customers are the best advertisement in this business," I explained. "When someone spends $500,000 restoring a rare Ferrari, they tell their friends about the quality of work and service they received." Marcus studied customer testimonials that read more like endorsements for fine art conservation than typical automotive service reviews. Collectors praised not just the technical quality of restorations, but also the educational value of working with someone who understood automotive history. "This level of customer loyalty is unheard of in new car sales," Marcus observed. "Most of my customers shop 3 or 4 dealerships looking for the best price." "That is because you are selling commodities," I replied. "New BMWs are manufactured by the thousands and sold through hundreds of dealerships. Classic restoration services are unique and cannot be replicated by competitors." I showed him a comparison analysis prepared by my financial advisor, demonstrating how my business model generated superior returns on investment compared to traditional automotive retail operations. The specialized nature of classic restoration created natural barriers to competition and allowed for premium pricing. "Your dealership requires enormous capital investment in inventory facilities and personnel," I noted, reviewing his financial statements that he had shared during a previous family gathering. "My shops require primarily expertise and reputation, which cannot be easily duplicated by competitors." The contrast was striking. Marcus's dealership carried over $4 million in vehicle inventory at any given time, with associated financing costs and depreciation risk. My restoration facilities typically held only tools, equipment, and work-in-progress projects owned by customers. "But surely your personal expenses must be much lower than mine," Marcus said, perhaps hoping to find some area where his lifestyle exceeded mine. I handed him a different folder containing documentation for my personal assets and expenditures. The numbers painted a picture of wealth that exceeded anything Marcus had imagined. "The house is worth $3.8 million purchased with cash 3 years ago," I said. "The classic car collection is currently valued at $4.2 million, though those values appreciate significantly each year." Marcus reviewed property tax assessments, insurance valuations, and investment account statements that showed a level of financial success he had never suspected. My total net worth exceeded $8 million, not including the value of my business operations. "How is this possible?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have been in the automotive industry for 15 years, and I assumed I was the successful one in our family." "Different definitions of success," I replied gently. You built a business that generates steady income selling new products. I built a business that preserves irreplaceable pieces of history while generating superior financial returns. The fundamental difference was clear in the numbers. Marcus's dealership required constant effort to maintain cash flow and profitability, while my restoration business generated premium revenue from a waiting list of clients who valued quality over price. The classic car market has appreciated faster than almost any other investment class over the past decade. I explained, showing Marcus market analysis reports from Hagerty and other automotive valuation services. Rare vehicles that I restored 5 years ago are now worth 2 to 3 times what the customers paid for the complete restoration. This created a virtuous cycle where satisfied customers became repeat clients and enthusiastic referrals. As their collections appreciated in value, they were motivated to invest in additional restoration projects and recommend my services to other collectors. Meanwhile, I continued. New car values depreciate rapidly, and dealership profits remain constrained by manufacturer pricing policies and competitive pressure. Marcus nodded slowly, finally understanding why his business felt like an endless struggle to maintain profitability, while mine generated substantial returns with less stress and lower overhead. As we sat in my office reviewing financial documents, my phone rang with a distinctive ringtone that I had assigned to my most important clients. The caller ID displayed a name that made me smile: Harrison Blackwood, the technology billionaire, whose collection included some of the most significant automotive treasures in private hands. "I need to take this," I told Marcus. "Harrison is one of my most valued clients." I answered the call and activated the speakerphone so Marcus could hear the conversation that was about to unfold. "Erica, I hope you are sitting down." Harrison's excited voice filled the office. "I just received a call from an estate attorney in Montana who thinks he has found something extraordinary." Harrison Blackwood was the founder of 3 successful technology companies and possessed a personal net worth estimated at $12 billion. His passion for automotive history had led him to assemble one of the finest private collections in the world, including vehicles formerly owned by European royalty and Hollywood legends. "What did they find?" I asked, already reaching for a notepad to record details. "A barn find that could rewrite automotive history." Harrison replied, his enthusiasm evident despite the digital connection. "The attorney represents the estate of a reclusive collector who died last month. Apparently, this man spent 40 years acquiring rare vehicles and storing them in climate-controlled buildings throughout rural Montana." Marcus leaned forward, intrigued despite his limited knowledge of classic car values. Even he understood that barn finds of significant vehicles could be worth millions of dollars. "The attorney sent me photographs of one particular vehicle that has me absolutely stunned," Harrison continued. "Erica, I believe they have found a 1955 Ferrari 410 Sport Berlinetta chassis, number 0594 GT. I nearly dropped my pen. Marcus noticed my sudden reaction but did not yet understand the significance of what Harrison had just described. "Harrison, are you certain about the chassis number?" I asked, my voice tight with excitement. 0594 GT would make it the vehicle that won the 1956 Mille Miglia. "Exactly," Harrison confirmed. "If the authentication proves correct, this is not just any rare Ferrari. This is the specific car driven by Alfonso de Portigo and Edmund Nelson to victory in one of the most prestigious races in automotive history." Marcus watched my face transform as the implications became clear. I was no longer just discussing a potential restoration project, but possibly the discovery of one of the most important racing cars ever built. The car disappeared from public records in the late 1960s. I said, consulting reference materials on my computer. Most historians assumed it had been destroyed or lost overseas. The estate attorney says his client acquired it through private channels in 1973 and stored it in a specially constructed building for nearly 50 years. Harrison explained. According to the documentation, the vehicle has not been started or moved since it entered storage. This level of preservation was almost unprecedented for a vehicle of such historical significance. Most racing cars from the 1950s had been modified, damaged, or restored multiple times over the decades, compromising their originality and historical authenticity. What condition are we talking about? I asked, opening a new file on my computer to document the conversation. The photographs show what appears to be completely original paint interior and mechanical components, Harrison replied. There is some surface corrosion and dust accumulation, but no evidence of accident damage or modification. Marcus listened to the conversation with growing amazement as he began to understand the significance of what was being discussed. This was not just another classic car project, but potentially the discovery of an automotive treasure that belonged in the same category as famous paintings or historical artifacts. Erica, I need your expertise to authenticate this vehicle, and if it proves genuine to handle the acquisition and restoration, Harrison continued, the estate is asking for sealed bids with a minimum of $8 million. $8 million for a car that might require additional millions in restoration work. Marcus tried to process numbers that exceeded his entire business's annual revenue for a single vehicle purchase. If authentication confirms this is the genuine Mille Miglia winner, what do you estimate the completed value would be? I asked, already researching comparable sales data. Conservative estimate would be $25 million, Harrison replied without hesitation. But honestly, a car with this provenance and level of originality could bring significantly more at auction. There are collectors who would pay anything to own the actual Mille Miglia winner. Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. $25 million for one automobile represented more money than most people would see in multiple lifetimes. The authentication process alone would require 3 to 4 weeks, I said, considering the complexity of verifying such a historically significant vehicle. We would need to examine chassis numbers, engine stampings, body construction details, and compare everything against period documentation and photographs. Money is no object, Harrison assured me. If this proves to be the genuine article, I am prepared to authorize a complete restoration to exact Mille Miglia specifications. Timeline and budget are secondary to historical accuracy. I calculated, quickly estimating the scope of work required to restore such an important vehicle to concours condition. The project would require 12 to 18 months and cost between $3 and $4 million, not including the purchase price. Harrison, if we proceed with this project, it would be the most significant restoration ever undertaken by my shops, I said. Are you prepared for that level of investment? Erica, finding the actual Mille Miglia winner would be like discovering a lost Monet painting. Harrison replied, this is not about money. It is about preserving automotive history for future generations. Marcus stared at me as the conversation continued, realizing that his sister operated in financial and cultural circles that he had never imagined. The casual discussion of 8-figure transactions and priceless automotive artifacts revealed a level of success that dwarfed his own achievements. I can fly to Montana this weekend for the initial assessment, I said, checking my calendar. If the vehicle appears authentic, we can begin detailed documentation immediately. Perfect, Harrison confirmed. I will have my jet pick you up Friday morning. We should have preliminary results by Monday. After ending the call, Marcus sat in stunned silence for several minutes. The conversation he had just overheard challenged everything he thought he understood about success wealth and the classic car industry. You just discussed spending $15 million like it was buying lunch, Marcus finally said. Harrison has spent over $30 million on automotive acquisitions through my shops over the past 6 years. I replied, updating client files with details from our conversation. For someone with his net worth, collecting rare automobiles is both a passion and an investment strategy. Marcus tried to comprehend client relationships involving 8-figure transactions, conducted with the casual familiarity of old friends. His largest single vehicle sale had been a $140,000 BMW to a local surgeon. "Is Harrison typical of your clientele?" Marcus asked. "The ultra-wealthy collectors represent about 15% of my client base, but they account for roughly 60% of total revenue," I explained. "These are people who collect automotive art the same way others collect paintings or sculptures." I showed Marcus documentation for other projects involving Harrison's collection, including the restoration of a 1938 Bugatti Type 57 SC Atlantic that had cost $4.8 million and taken 19 months to complete. The key to working with collectors at this level is understanding that money is not their primary concern, I continued. They want expertise, authenticity, and the confidence that their investment is being handled by the best possible specialist. Marcus nodded slowly, beginning to understand that my business operated according to principles completely different from traditional automotive retail. In his world, customers focused primarily on price and convenience. In mine, they valued expertise and historical preservation above all other considerations. 20 minutes after ending the call with Harrison, we heard vehicles pulling into my driveway. Through the office window, Marcus watched two news vans parked near the front entrance, their satellite equipment extending toward the sky, like mechanical flowers reaching for sunlight. "How did they find out so quickly?" Marcus asked, recognizing the logos of the local ABC affiliate and a business news network. "The automotive journalism community is very well connected," I explained, checking my phone for missed calls and text messages. "News about significant barn finds travels fast, especially when it involves vehicles worth tens of millions of dollars." The first reporter to reach my door was Jennifer Walsh from the Wall Street Journal's automotive section, someone I had worked with before on stories about the classic car market. She was followed by a crew from Bloomberg Business News, who had apparently driven down from Chicago when word of the Montana discovery reached their newsroom. "Erica, can you confirm reports that Harrison Blackwood may have located the missing Mille Miglia Ferrari?" Jennifer asked as I opened the front door. Marcus stood behind me, watching his sister handle media attention with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to being in the spotlight. I had never mentioned being interviewed by national business publications or appearing on financial news programs. "I can confirm that we are investigating what appears to be a significant barn find in Montana," I replied carefully. "However, authentication will require several weeks of detailed analysis before we can make any definitive statements about the vehicle's identity or historical significance." The Bloomberg correspondent David Chen pushed forward with his microphone. "Sources suggest this could be the most valuable barn find in automotive history. Can you comment on the potential impact on classic car market valuations?" I gestured for both news crews to follow me toward the garage, where my personal collection would provide visual context for their stories about rare automobile discoveries and restoration expertise. Significant barn finds always generate excitement in the collector community, I said, opening the garage doors to reveal my 4 pristine classics. However, the true value of any discovery depends entirely on authentication, provenance, and condition. Both camera crews immediately began filming my collection, recognizing that these museum-quality vehicles would provide compelling visuals for their stories about the Montana Ferrari discovery. "Ms. Thompson, your reputation for authentication and restoration has made you the go-to expert for projects involving the world's most valuable automobiles," Jennifer said, conducting her interview while cameramen captured detailed shots of the Shelby Cobra and Mercedes Gullwing. "What does it take to verify the authenticity of a vehicle that could be worth $25 million? Marcus listened to my response with growing amazement as I described authentication procedures involving X-ray analysis of chassis components, metallurgical testing of engine parts, and comparison of manufacturing details against factory documentation from the 1950s. Authentication of historically significant vehicles requires expertise in automotive history engineering and detective work," I explained. Every component must be examined and verified against known examples and period documentation. David Chen followed up with questions about market trends, asking about the investment potential of classic automobiles compared to traditional asset classes like stocks and real estate. The classic car market has outperformed the S&P 500 over the past decade. I replied, citing statistics that Marcus had never heard before. Rare vehicles with documented provenance and professional restoration have appreciated at an average rate of 12% annually. The interview continued for another 15 minutes, with both reporters asking detailed questions about restoration techniques, market valuations, and the cultural importance of preserving automotive history. Marcus observed that I answered every question with authority and expertise, clearly comfortable discussing topics that would be foreign to most people in the automotive industry. "One final question," Jennifer said as the interview concluded. "You have built a reputation as one of the world's premier restoration specialists. What advice would you give to someone interested in entering the classic car market?" "Education and patience," I replied. Successful collecting requires understanding automotive history, recognizing quality restoration work, and building relationships with reputable specialists. The market rewards knowledge and punishes impulsive decisions. After the news crews departed, Marcus stood in my driveway looking stunned by what he had just witnessed. His sister had been interviewed by national media as a recognized expert in a field he had never known existed. "You handle media interviews like a corporate executive," Marcus observed. "How often does this happen?" "Maybe once or twice per month," I replied, leading him back toward the house. The classic car market generates significant business news coverage, and reporters often contact me for expert commentary on trends and major transactions. I showed Marcus a media folder containing copies of newspaper articles, magazine features, and online stories that had quoted my expertise over the past 2 years. The publications ranged from automotive enthusiast magazines to major financial newspapers like the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times. This article from Forbes discusses the investment potential of classic cars, I said, opening to a story that featured my analysis of market trends and collector behavior. They interviewed me because my restoration work gives me insight into what drives values in the high-end automotive market. Marcus read the article, noting that I was described as one of America's foremost authorities on classic automobile valuation and restoration. The piece quoted my predictions about market segments that had proven remarkably accurate over the months following publication. "Do you realize that you are famous in ways I never imagined?" Marcus asked. "Not famous," I corrected. "Respected within a specialized community. The classic car world is relatively small, and reputation spreads quickly among collectors and industry professionals." I pulled up my LinkedIn profile, which showed over 8,000 connections, including automotive journalists, auction house executives, museum curators, and collectors from around the world. Professional recommendations came from clients whose names Marcus recognized from business magazines and entertainment industry publications. These connections represent 20 years of building relationships and establishing credibility, I explained. Success in this industry depends entirely on trust and reputation. Marcus scrolled through endorsements from clients who had invested millions of dollars in restoration projects, each testimonial emphasizing my expertise, integrity, and commitment to historical accuracy. "This is a completely different kind of success than what I understood," Marcus admitted. "You have built something that goes far beyond just making money." As the excitement from the media interviews subsided, Marcus's phone began ringing with calls he had been avoiding all week. I watched his expression change as he glanced at the caller ID and declined the call for the 3rd time in an hour. "Is everything all right?" I asked, noting the tension in his voice when he had answered earlier calls. Marcus hesitated, clearly reluctant to discuss his business problems after spending the afternoon learning about my success. Finally, he set down his phone and looked at me with an expression of defeat. "My dealership is in trouble," he admitted quietly. "Serious financial trouble." I had suspected as much for several months based on conversations with my clients who traded luxury vehicles and industry reports about declining sales in the traditional automotive market. Electric vehicle trends and changing consumer preferences had disrupted the luxury car market in ways that many dealers were struggling to address. "How serious?" I asked, settling into a chair across from him. "I am behind on 3 months of floor plan payments," Marcus said, referring to the financing arrangements that allowed dealerships to maintain inventory. "BMW is threatening to terminate my franchise agreement if I cannot bring the accounts current by the end of next month." The numbers he outlined painted a picture of a business in rapid decline. Sales volume had dropped 43% over the past 18 months, while overhead costs remained fixed at levels designed for much higher revenue. Employee turnover had increased as experienced salespeople left for more stable opportunities. "The electric vehicle transition has hurt luxury car sales more than anyone anticipated," Marcus continued. "Customers are either waiting for electric models that BMW has not released yet, or they are buying Tesla vehicles instead of traditional luxury sedans." I pulled up industry reports on my computer showing market data that confirmed Marcus's observations. Traditional luxury car sales had declined significantly as consumers delayed purchases or shifted toward electric alternatives. "What about financing options or manufacturer support?" I asked, though I suspected BMW would be reluctant to invest in struggling dealerships during a market transition. "BMW offered a restructuring plan that would require me to invest another $2 million in facility upgrades and inventory," Marcus replied. "They want dealerships to prepare for electric vehicle sales, but the local market is not ready for that transition yet." The catch-22 was obvious. Marcus needed capital investment to remain competitive, but his current financial situation made such investment impossible. Meanwhile, continuing with the status quo would lead to inevitable business failure within 6 to 12 months. "How much debt are we talking about?" I asked. Marcus pulled out financial statements that told the story of a business that had grown too quickly during good times and was now struggling to survive changing market conditions. Total debt exceeded $4.8 million, including floor plan financing, real estate loans, and operating credit lines. "The building alone is worth about $3.2 million, but I owe $2.9 million on the mortgage," Marcus explained. "If I liquidate everything tomorrow, I might walk away with $500,000 after paying off all creditors." This represented the destruction of 15 years of work building what had once been a successful business. Marcus had invested his inheritance, his savings and years of his life into an enterprise that was now failing through no fault of his own. "I keep thinking about what you said earlier about different definitions of success," Marcus said. "I thought I was building something permanent, but it turns out I was just riding a wave that was bound to crash eventually." I studied his financial statements more carefully, looking for assets or opportunities that might provide alternatives to simple liquidation. The situation was challenging, but not necessarily hopeless. "What about your service department?" I asked, noting that parts and service revenue had remained relatively stable even as vehicle sales declined. "Service is actually profitable," Marcus admitted. "People still need maintenance and repairs on their existing BMWs regardless of new car sales trends." This represented a potentially viable foundation for restructuring the business. Service operations required less capital investment and generated steadier cash flow than sales while building long-term customer relationships. "Have you considered scaling back the sales operation and focusing primarily on service?" I suggested. "You could reduce inventory costs and overhead while maintaining the profitable aspects of the business." Marcus had not seriously considered this option, partly because it would require abandoning his identity as a successful luxury car dealer. However, a smaller service-focused operation might survive market changes that were destroying larger competitors. "The problem is that BMW requires dealers to maintain certain inventory levels and facility standards," Marcus explained. "I cannot just decide to become a service-only operation without losing the franchise. We spent the next hour exploring various restructuring options, each presenting different challenges and trade-offs. Independent service operations faced competition from BMW-certified shops, while maintaining the franchise required capital investments that Marcus could not afford. There might be another option, I said, carefully, not wanting to appear condescending after learning about his financial difficulties. What if we approach this as partners rather than competitors? Marcus looked up from the financial statements he had been reviewing. What do you mean? Your expertise in luxury automotive retail could be valuable to my clients, I explained. Many collectors need reliable modern vehicles for daily transportation, while their classics are being restored. Others want to acquire specific BMW models as future collectibles. The idea began to take shape as we discussed the complementary nature of our businesses. My restoration clients often needed exactly the services that Marcus provided, while his customer base might include future collectors interested in my restoration expertise. Additionally, I continued, your facility could potentially house overflow projects from my restoration shops. We are operating at full capacity, and I regularly turn away smaller projects because we lack space. Marcus considered the possibilities, recognizing that partnership might offer solutions that neither of us could achieve independently. His business problems were primarily financial rather than operational, while my business success had created opportunities that exceeded my current capacity. Would you seriously consider investing in my operation? Marcus asked. I would consider investing in our operation, I corrected, but it would need to be a genuine partnership with shared decision-making and complementary responsibilities. The conversation continued for another hour as we explored the practical details of how such a partnership might function. Marcus possessed expertise in automotive retail customer service and business operations that could benefit my restoration business. Meanwhile, my financial resources and industry connections could provide the stability his operation needed to survive the current market transition. I need to think about this, Marcus said finally. 6 hours ago, I thought you were my unsuccessful sister who needed financial advice. Now you are offering to save my business. I smiled at the irony of our situation. 6 hours ago, you thought success meant selling new cars to suburban doctors. Now you are learning that success can take many different forms. Marcus spent the rest of the evening reviewing financial projections and partnership scenarios that could transform his failing dealership into a profitable component of my growing restoration empire. Rather than gloating over his predicament or demanding an apology for years of condescension, I focused on creating solutions that would benefit both our businesses and repair our fractured relationship. The fundamental problem with your current model is dependence on high-volume, low-margin sales. I explained, spreading partnership proposals across my dining room table. Luxury car buyers are increasingly sophisticated and price-sensitive, which makes traditional dealership economics unsustainable. I had spent 2 hours developing a restructuring plan that would leverage Marcus's retail expertise while integrating his operation with my restoration business. The proposal involved converting 60% of his showroom space into a classic car showroom and customer reception area, while maintaining BMW service capabilities for both new and vintage vehicles. My clients often need loaner vehicles while their classics are being restored. I continued outlining the synergies between our businesses. Premium loaner service could generate steady revenue while building relationships with high-net-worth customers who appreciate quality and attention to detail. Marcus studied financial projections, showing how such a partnership could generate $2.4 million in annual revenue, with profit margins exceeding 30%. The numbers represented a complete transformation from his current struggling operation. But this would require BMW to approve significant changes to the franchise agreement, Marcus pointed out. They might prefer to terminate my contract and award the territory to a more financially stable dealer. Not necessarily, I replied, showing him research into BMW's strategy for supporting dealerships during the electric vehicle transition. BMW needs partners who understand luxury customers and can provide specialized services. A partnership with an established restoration business might actually strengthen your franchise application. The key insight was that BMW valued dealer relationships with affluent customers more than raw sales volume. My restoration clients represented exactly the demographic that BMW wanted to reach: successful individuals who appreciated automotive craftsmanship and were willing to pay premium prices for quality. Additionally, your facility could serve as a regional hub for classic BMW restoration. I suggested pulling up photographs of vintage BMWs that my shops had restored over the years. BMW Classic Division actively supports restoration of vintage models, and they provide technical assistance to certified restoration partners. This represented a potential revenue stream that Marcus had never considered. Classic BMW restoration generated higher profit margins than new car sales while building deeper customer relationships and brand loyalty. I would be willing to invest $2 million in cash to restructure the operation, I said, presenting a formal investment proposal. In exchange, I would expect 49% ownership and operational control over restoration activities. The investment would allow Marcus to pay off immediate debts, upgrade facilities to support classic car restoration, and maintain BMW franchise requirements while transitioning to a more sustainable business model. You would essentially be saving my business, Marcus said quietly, struggling with the role reversal, implicit in accepting investment from the sister he had always considered unsuccessful. I would be investing in our business, I corrected gently. Your retail experience and customer service expertise are valuable assets that could benefit both operations. This is not charity, it is a strategic partnership. Marcus reviewed the partnership terms, noting that I had structured the agreement to preserve his dignity while providing necessary financial support. He would retain majority ownership and day-to-day operational control, while I would oversee restoration activities and provide strategic guidance. "Why are you willing to do this?" Marcus asked. "After all the ways I have dismissed your work and criticized your choices, why would you want to partner with me?" I considered his question carefully before responding. "Because family is more important than business success, and because I believe you have learned something important about respect and humility today." The afternoon's revelations had fundamentally changed Marcus's perspective on success achievement and the value of different approaches to building a meaningful career. He had discovered that his assumptions about my life and choices were completely wrong, while his own definition of success had proven fragile and unsustainable. "I owe you an enormous apology," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just for today, but for years of treating you like a failure when you were actually building something remarkable." "Apologies are less important than learning," I replied. "The question is whether you are willing to approach business and family relationships differently going forward." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding that accepting my partnership offer would require abandoning his superiority complex and treating me as an equal partner rather than a little sister who needed guidance. "There's one more thing you should know before we finalize any agreement," I said, reaching for my phone to check recent messages. "Mother is planning to visit tomorrow afternoon, and she has something important she wants to discuss with both of us." Marcus looked puzzled. What could Mother possibly want to discuss that relates to our business partnership? I smiled mysteriously. "Let me just say that today's revelations about my success are not the only family secrets that have been kept over the years." Our mother, Patricia, arrived the next afternoon carrying a worn leather satchel and wearing an expression that suggested she had been planning this conversation for a very long time. At 73 years old, she remained sharp and observant, with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that missed nothing important. "Before you two continue planning your business partnership," she said, settling into my living room with the authority of someone who had raised two strong-willed children, "there are some things you both need to understand about our family history." Marcus and I exchanged glances, wondering what additional revelations could possibly surprise us after the previous day's dramatic discoveries about my restoration business and financial success. Marcus, you have spent years dismissing your sister's work as impractical hobby nonsense. Patricia began her tone, carrying the weight of maternal disappointment. Erica, you have been keeping your success secret to avoid dealing with family skepticism and judgment. She opened the leather satchel and removed a collection of magazines and newspaper clippings that we had never seen before. The publications dated back over 5 years and contained features about my restoration work business success and growing reputation in the classic car community. I have been following Erica's career closely since she started her business. Patricia continued spreading the articles across my coffee table. Classic Car Magazine, Hemmings Motor News, Automobile Quarterly. I subscribe to all the publications that feature her work. Marcus stared at the collection of articles, realizing that our mother had been aware of my success and reputation long before yesterday's shocking revelations. Meanwhile, I was surprised to learn that she had been tracking my career through automotive journalism. "Mother, why did you never mention that you knew about my business?" I asked. "Because I was hoping you children would eventually find your way back to each other without parental interference," Patricia replied. "I wanted Marcus to discover your success naturally and realize his own mistakes." She pulled out a particularly prominent feature from the Wall Street Journal that had described my authentication work on a $20 million Ferrari collection. The article included photographs of me examining rare vehicles and quoted my expertise on market trends and restoration techniques. I was incredibly proud when this article was published. Patricia said, showing Marcus the full-page spread that had appeared in the business section 6 months earlier. But I was also heartbroken that my children could not share in each other's achievements. Marcus studied the article with a mixture of amazement and shame, understanding that his mother had been witnessing his dismissive attitude toward accomplishments he had never bothered to investigate or understand. I encouraged Erica to keep her success quiet because I hoped it would prevent additional family conflict. Patricia continued, "But I see now that secrecy only made the problem worse by allowing misconceptions to persist." She turned to Marcus with an expression that reminded both of us of childhood lectures about treating each other with respect and kindness. "Your sister has built something remarkable while you were building something conventional," Patricia said bluntly. "Both paths have value, but only one of you has shown respect for the other's choices." The weight of maternal judgment settled heavily on Marcus's shoulders as he recognized the truth in her words. He had spent years criticizing my lifestyle and choices while remaining completely ignorant about my actual achievements and success. "But there is something else both of you need to know," Patricia said, reaching deeper into her satchel. "Your grandfather left more than restoration knowledge and automotive parts when he died." She withdrew a manila envelope that had been sealed with red wax and marked with instructions that it should only be opened when both grandchildren demonstrated genuine appreciation for automotive history and family heritage. "Grandpa Joe made me promise to keep this sealed until both his grandchildren understood the importance of preserving beautiful things rather than simply discarding them for convenience," Patricia explained. "Yesterday's conversation convinced me that you are both finally ready." Marcus and I watched as she carefully broke the wax seal and opened the envelope to reveal a leather-bound manual that looked even older and more substantial than the restoration journal I had inherited years earlier. "This is Grandpa's Master Restoration Manual," Patricia said, handling the volume with reverent care. It contains techniques and knowledge that he learned from European craftsmen who worked on automobiles before World War II. The manual was filled with hand-drawn diagrams showing metalworking techniques, paint formulation recipes, and construction methods that had been used to build the world's most beautiful automobiles during the golden age of automotive design. Some of these techniques were trade secrets passed down through generations of craftsmen. Patricia continued opening to pages that showed detailed illustrations of body panel fabrication methods. When those craftsmen immigrated to America or died during the war, their knowledge would have been lost forever if Grandpa had not preserved it. Marcus examined the intricate diagrams and precise handwriting, beginning to understand that our grandfather had possessed knowledge that was literally priceless in the modern restoration community. The manual also contains something else, Patricia said, turning to a section near the back of the volume. Documentation for automotive components and materials that Grandpa acquired but never used in his own projects. The pages listed rare parts, specialized tools, and vintage materials that had been stored in climate-controlled conditions for over 40 years. Engine components for luxury cars from the 1920s and 30s. Hand-forged tools used by European coach builders. Paint pigments and chemical formulations that were no longer available through modern suppliers. This collection is stored in a warehouse facility that Grandpa rented under a long-term lease, Patricia explained. I have been paying the storage fees for 23 years, waiting for the right time to reveal its existence. Marcus and I stared at each other as we realized that our grandfather had left behind a treasure trove of restoration materials that would be worth millions of dollars to the right buyers. The lease agreement specifies that the collection can only be inherited by family members who demonstrate genuine commitment to automotive restoration and historical preservation. Patricia continued. Yesterday's reconciliation and partnership plan convinced me that you both finally understand what Grandpa was trying to preserve. She handed me a set of keys and a warehouse address that was located less than 20 miles from my restoration facility. Erica, you have the expertise to properly value and utilize these materials, Patricia said. Marcus, you have the business experience to help manage and distribute them effectively. The inheritance represented not just financial value, but also the completion of our grandfather's vision for preserving automotive history through family collaboration rather than individual competition. There is one final condition, Patricia added with a slight smile. The inheritance can only be accessed jointly. Neither of you can claim individual ownership of any components or materials. Marcus and I looked at each other, understanding that our grandfather had designed this inheritance to force us to work together and respect each other's contributions to automotive preservation. He planned this partnership from beyond the grave, Marcus said with grudging admiration. Grandpa Joe was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else, Patricia replied. He knew that someday you would both need what he had preserved, and he wanted to ensure that family cooperation would be required to access it. The following Monday morning, Marcus and I drove to the warehouse facility that had housed our grandfather's secret collection for over 2 decades. The address led us to a modern storage complex on the outskirts of Springfield, where climate-controlled units protected valuable items from temperature fluctuations and moisture damage. Unit 47B. I read from the documentation Patricia had provided as we walked past rows of identical metal doors toward the rear section of the facility. Marcus carried the keys our mother had entrusted to us, his hands trembling slightly with anticipation as we approached the storage unit that contained the final piece of our grandfather's automotive legacy. I cannot believe she kept this secret for 23 years, Marcus said as he inserted the key into the lock. The storage fees alone must have cost her thousands of dollars. The heavy door rolled up to reveal a space that took our breath away. Professional shelving systems lined the walls from floor to ceiling, holding thousands of carefully cataloged automotive components. Workbenches contained precision tools that looked as though they had been manufactured by master craftsmen rather than industrial factories. Chrome bumpers and trim pieces hung on padded displays to prevent scratching or damage. "This is like discovering King Tut's tomb," Marcus whispered, stepping into the space with reverence. Every component had been wrapped, labeled, and stored according to professional museum standards. Engine blocks rested on custom stands designed to prevent distortion. Delicate electrical components were sealed in protective containers filled with inert gas to prevent corrosion. I opened the first catalog box and found documentation that revealed the scope of what our grandfather had accumulated. Parts for Duesenberg, Auburn, Cord, Packard, and dozens of other luxury Marques that had disappeared during the Great Depression and World War II. "Look at this," Marcus said, holding up a chrome air cleaner assembly that bore the distinctive logo of the Stutz Motor Company. "This is for a car that has not been manufactured since 1935. The component was in perfect condition, still wrapped in the original factory packaging that had protected it for nearly 90 years. Such parts were essentially impossible to find through normal restoration channels, making them worth thousands of dollars to collectors restoring period vehicles. Grandpa acquired this collection over 50 years. I said, reading through documentation that showed purchase dates, sources, and compatibility information for each component. Some of these parts were purchased directly from manufacturers who were going out of business. We spent hours exploring the collection, discovering treasures that would be invaluable for authentic restoration projects. A complete set of wire wheels for a 1937 Bugatti Type 57, hand-forged body panels for a 1928 Bentley Speed 6, even original factory tools used to assemble vehicles that were now worth millions of dollars. The total value of this collection must exceed $2 million. Marcus estimated, beginning to understand the financial significance of what our grandfather had preserved. "The financial value is secondary to the historical importance," I replied, examining a box containing original paint samples from luxury cars of the 1920s. These materials allow authentic restoration of vehicles that would otherwise be impossible to complete correctly. We found detailed notes explaining how each component should be properly utilized, along with technical drawings showing installation procedures and compatibility requirements. Our grandfather had anticipated that future restorers would need guidance to properly utilize materials and techniques from a different era. "He really did think of everything," Marcus said, reading installation instructions for rebuilding a transmission that had not been manufactured since Herbert Hoover was president. The warehouse also contained equipment that was no longer available through modern suppliers, a 1947 hydraulic lift specifically designed for servicing low-slung sports cars, metalworking tools that had been handmade by European craftsmen, even measuring instruments that provided the precision required for rebuilding vintage engines to exact specifications. "Some of these tools are literally irreplaceable," I said, examining a micrometer set that had been manufactured in Switzerland before World War II. "Modern tools are more convenient, but they lack the precision required for authentic vintage restoration." Marcus discovered a section containing complete engines that had been purchased as spare parts but never installed in vehicles. A Duesenberg Straight 8 that had been stored in protective oil for 60 years. A Cord V8 that still bore factory assembly marks. Each engine was accompanied by documentation showing its provenance and specifications. "These engines alone are worth more than most people's houses," Marcus said, consulting reference materials that showed current market values for such components. "More importantly, they represent the pinnacle of American automotive engineering during the golden age of luxury car manufacturing," I replied. "These engines powered vehicles that competed with the finest automobiles from Europe." As we continued exploring the collection, we began to understand how our grandfather's vision for preservation could enhance both our businesses. The warehouse contained exactly the components and expertise that my restoration clients needed for authentic projects, while Marcus's facility could provide the modern support services that collectors required. "This changes everything," Marcus said, recognizing how access to such rare components would differentiate our partnership from every other restoration operation in the country. "Grandpa Joe planned it that way," I replied, finding a note written in his familiar handwriting that explained his hopes for how future family members would utilize his life's work. The note described his dream of seeing his grandchildren work together to preserve automotive history while building a sustainable business that would continue his mission for future generations. He had envisioned exactly the partnership that Marcus and I were now planning. We should bring everything back to our facilities. I suggested beginning to plan the logistics of integrating this collection with my existing restoration operations. Actually, Marcus said slowly, I think we should leave everything here and convert this warehouse into our joint headquarters. The idea made perfect sense as we looked around the space with fresh perspective. The facility was already equipped for storing valuable automotive components, and it was centrally located between my restoration shops and Marcus's dealership. We could expand the lease to include additional space for a showroom and client meeting areas. Marcus continued his retail experience, helping him envision how the facility could be transformed into a destination for serious collectors. I nodded, recognizing that a central facility would allow us to showcase both restoration expertise and vintage component availability while providing a professional environment for meeting with high-net-worth clients. The partnership is starting to feel real, Marcus said, looking around the warehouse that would soon become the headquarters of our combined operation. Grandpa Joe would be proud, I replied, understanding that we were finally ready to fulfill the vision he had been nurturing since we were children playing in his cluttered garage. News of our partnership spread through automotive circles with remarkable speed, generating industry attention that neither Marcus nor I had anticipated. By Wednesday morning, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from automotive journalists, potential clients and competitors who wanted to understand how a luxury car dealer and a restoration specialist plan to revolutionize the classic car market. Erica, this is Michael Stevens from Barrett Jackson, said the caller who had reached me while Marcus and I were planning the warehouse conversion. We understand that you and your brother are creating a new kind of automotive destination that combines restoration services with luxury retail and vintage component sales. Barrett Jackson was one of the most prestigious classic car auction houses in the world, and their interest in our partnership represented validation from the highest levels of the collector community. We would like to discuss consigning 3 vehicles for our upcoming Scottsdale sale in January, Michael continued. Additionally, we are interested in featuring your partnership in our auction catalog as an example of innovation in the classic car market. Marcus listened to the conversation with growing amazement as he began to understand the level of industry recognition that our collaboration was generating. Barrett Jackson's endorsement would introduce our partnership to thousands of serious collectors and establish our credibility at the highest levels of the market. Which vehicles are you considering for consignment? I asked, pulling up my inventory of completed restoration projects. The 1967 Shelby Cobra from your personal collection has attracted significant attention from our acquisition team, Michael replied. We also understand that you recently completed restoration on a 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing and a 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda. These were 3 of my finest restoration achievements, representing hundreds of hours of meticulous work and exceptional attention to historical detail. Consigning them at Barrett Jackson would showcase our capabilities to the most sophisticated collectors in the world. Auction estimates would range from $300,000 to $600,000 per vehicle, Michael continued. However, vehicles consigned by recognized restoration specialists typically command premium prices because buyers trust the quality and authenticity. Marcus calculated quickly, realizing that successful auction sales could generate nearly $2 million in gross revenue, while establishing our partnership as a major force in the classic car market. We would be honored to participate in the Scottsdale sale, I replied, understanding the marketing value of Barrett Jackson exposure for our new business venture. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes as we discussed auction logistics, marketing opportunities, and the potential for establishing a long-term relationship between our partnership and Barrett Jackson's collector network. One additional opportunity, Michael said as the call concluded. We would like to offer you booth space at our Scottsdale event to display vintage components from your grandfather's collection. Collectors are always searching for authentic parts for their restoration projects. This represented an unprecedented opportunity to showcase the rarest components from our warehouse, while building relationships with collectors who needed exactly the services our partnership could provide. After ending the call, Marcus and I spent an hour researching Barrett-Jackson's marketing reach and industry influence. The Scottsdale auction attracted over 300,000 visitors and generated hundreds of millions of dollars in sales annually. "This is like being invited to exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art," Marcus said, studying attendance figures and media coverage from previous Barrett-Jackson events. "The exposure will be invaluable for establishing our reputation." I agreed, understanding how auction house endorsement would accelerate our business development by years. 2 hours later, my phone rang again with a call that provided even greater validation of our partnership concept. "Ms. Thompson, this is Sarah Mitchell from Classic Car Magazine," said the caller. "We would like to feature your partnership with your brother as our cover story for the March issue." Classic Car Magazine was the most influential publication in the automotive enthusiast community, with a readership that included the most serious collectors and restoration specialists worldwide. "Our editors believe your story represents an important trend toward collaboration and innovation in the classic car market," Sarah continued. "We want to explore how family partnerships can preserve automotive knowledge while building sustainable businesses." The article would include a comprehensive feature about our backgrounds, the discovery of our grandfather's collection, and our vision for combining restoration expertise with luxury retail services and vintage component sales. "We would also like to photograph your facilities and showcase some of the most significant pieces from your grandfather's warehouse," Sarah added. "Our readers are always interested in learning about rare components and restoration techniques." Marcus and I exchanged glances, understanding that a Classic Car Magazine cover story would establish our credibility with exactly the audience we needed to reach. "The article will be supported by online content, including video tours of your facilities and interviews about your restoration philosophy," Sarah continued. "We expect this to be one of our most popular features of the year." The magazine's marketing team estimated that the combined print and digital exposure would reach over 2 million automotive enthusiasts worldwide, including virtually every serious collector and restoration specialist. "Additionally, we would like to schedule a follow-up feature about the Montana Ferrari project once authentication is complete," Sarah said. "Our readers are fascinated by barn finds and authentication processes." This represented ongoing media attention that would keep our partnership in the spotlight while we established our reputation and built our client base. "We are honored by your interest," I replied, understanding that Classic Car Magazine's endorsement would provide credibility that money could not buy. After ending the call, Marcus sat quietly for several minutes before speaking. "6 months ago, I thought I was the successful member of our family," he said, finally. "Today, I am watching you handle calls from the most prestigious organizations in the automotive world." "Success is not a competition between family members," I replied gently. "The goal is building something meaningful together." Marcus nodded slowly, continuing to adjust his perspective on achievement recognition and the value of different approaches to building a meaningful career. "I'm starting to understand that my definition of success was too narrow," Marcus admitted. "You built something that combines passion, expertise, and financial reward while preserving important pieces of history." The phone calls from Barrett-Jackson and Classic Car Magazine represented just the beginning of industry recognition for our partnership. Over the following days, we received inquiries from automotive museums, restoration specialists, and collectors from around the world who wanted to understand our approach to combining traditional craftsmanship with modern business practices. On Friday morning, Harrison Blackwood's private jet touched down at Springfield Regional Airport, carrying me, Marcus, and a team of automotive authentication experts toward what could be the discovery of the century. The flight to Montana gave us 3 hours to review documentation about the Ferrari 410 Sport that had supposedly been hidden in a barn for nearly 50 years. "If this vehicle proves authentic, it will validate everything we have built together," I told Marcus as we studied photographs of the car that had emerged from decades of storage. The preliminary images were extraordinarily promising. Original paint showed the distinctive wear patterns consistent with a racing car from the 1950s. Interior components displayed the correct materials and construction techniques. Most importantly, visible chassis and engine numbers matched factory records for the specific vehicle that had won the 1956 Mille Miglia. Even if the car requires complete restoration, the project would establish our partnership as the premier destination for the world's most significant automotive preservation work. Marcus replied, finally understanding the transformative potential of working with vehicles of such historical importance. Harrison had assembled a team that included Italy's leading Ferrari authentication expert, a specialist in vintage racing car provenance, and a forensic metallurgist who could verify the age and composition of critical components. The authentication process would require 3 days of detailed examination, using equipment that could analyze materials down to the molecular level. The estate attorney has confirmed that bidding will close Monday afternoon, Harrison said as our jet began its descent toward Billings. We need definitive authentication results before then to make an informed offer. The drive from Billings to the remote ranch where the car had been stored took us through some of the most beautiful countryside in America. Rolling hills covered with winter grass stretched toward snow-capped mountains that seemed to touch the sky. The isolation was perfect for someone who wanted to keep valuable automobiles hidden from the outside world. The owner was a petroleum engineer who made a fortune in oil exploration during the 1970s, Harrison explained as we drove toward the ranch. He spent 40 years acquiring rare vehicles through private channels, never displaying them publicly or allowing them to be photographed. When we arrived at the ranch, the estate attorney led us to a series of climate-controlled buildings that housed one of the most significant private car collections any of us had ever seen. Dozens of rare automobiles rested under custom covers in facilities that rivaled major automotive museums. The Ferrari is in Building 3, the attorney said, leading us toward a structure that had been specifically constructed to house the most valuable vehicles in the collection. As the building's overhead doors opened and lights illuminated the interior, we found ourselves staring at automotive history. The Ferrari 410 Sport sat exactly as it had been parked nearly 50 years earlier, its racing blue paint dulled by time but otherwise showing remarkably original condition. Marcus watched in fascination as the authentication experts began their examination, using specialized tools to verify chassis numbers, engine specifications, and construction details that would confirm or deny the vehicle's identity. The chassis number matches factory records exactly, announced Dr. Roberto Giuliani, Ferrari's chief authentication specialist. Additionally, the stamping patterns and metallurgy are consistent with 1955 manufacturing techniques. Hour by hour, the evidence mounted in favor of authenticity. Paint samples matched the specific color formulation used for factory racing cars. Engine internals showed the correct casting marks and assembly details. Even minor components like electrical fittings and hardware matched documented specifications for vehicles prepared by the factory racing department. This is definitely the genuine Mille Miglia winner, Dr. Giuliani announced after 2 days of exhaustive examination. The level of originality is exceptional, with approximately 95% of components being period correct and unmodified. Harrison immediately authorized a sealed bid of $15 million, confident that successful authentication justified the premium price required to secure the vehicle. Monday afternoon, the estate attorney called to inform us that our bid had been successful. Harrison Blackwood was now the owner of one of the most significant racing cars in automotive history. Erica, I want your team to handle the complete restoration, Harrison said as we celebrated the successful acquisition. This car deserves the finest craftsmanship available anywhere in the world. The restoration project would require 18 months and cost approximately $3.5 million, not including the purchase price. However, the completed vehicle would be worth at least $25 million and potentially much more at auction. This single project will establish our partnership as the premier destination for historically significant restoration work, I told Marcus as we flew back to Illinois. We will be handling one of the most important automotive preservation projects ever undertaken. Marcus understood that our collaboration had achieved something remarkable in just 2 weeks. We had transformed his failing dealership into part of a partnership that was handling projects worth tens of millions of dollars while preserving irreplaceable pieces of automotive history. The Mille Miglia Ferrari represents everything our grandfather hoped we would accomplish, Marcus said, finally grasping the full scope of what we had built together. More importantly, it represents what we can accomplish when we respect each other's expertise and work toward common goals. I replied, thinking about how far our relationship had evolved since that confrontation at our cousin's wedding. The successful authentication and acquisition of the Ferrari had validated our partnership in the eyes of the most sophisticated collectors and industry professionals. We had demonstrated the ability to handle projects of unprecedented historical significance while maintaining the technical expertise and financial resources required for such challenging work. I owe you more than an apology, Marcus said quietly as Illinois farmland passed below our aircraft. I owe you recognition for building something I was too narrow-minded to understand. We built it together, I corrected him. The partnership combines your business expertise with my technical knowledge and Grandpa's legacy to create something none of us could have achieved individually. As we landed in Springfield, both of us understood that our family's future had been fundamentally transformed by recent events. We had discovered not only hidden wealth and business opportunities, but also the importance of respecting different definitions of success and supporting each other's dreams. 3 months later, our extended family gathered for our traditional holiday celebration, but this year's event carried special significance for everyone involved. Marcus and I had spent weeks planning how to share our story with relatives who remembered the public confrontation at Jennifer's wedding and wanted to understand how we had reconciled our differences. The celebration took place at my house, where the 4-car garage had been converted into a showroom displaying both my personal collection and select components from our grandfather's warehouse. Family members who had never shown interest in classic cars found themselves captivated by the beauty and craftsmanship of vehicles that represented the pinnacle of automotive design. Before we share dinner, Marcus and I have something important we want to tell all of you, I announced as everyone gathered in the living room. Marcus stood beside me, no longer the arrogant, dismissive older brother who had humiliated me at the wedding, but a partner who had learned valuable lessons about respect, humility, and the importance of supporting family dreams rather than criticizing them. I owe everyone here an explanation and an apology. Marcus began, his voice carrying genuine emotion. For years, I have judged Erica's choices based on appearances, rather than taking the time to understand what she was actually accomplishing. He described discovering my restoration business, learning about my financial success, and recognizing how his own narrow definition of achievement had blinded him to remarkable accomplishments that deserved celebration rather than criticism. While I was selling mass-produced luxury cars to suburban doctors, Erica was preserving irreplaceable pieces of automotive history for collectors around the world. Marcus continued. While I thought I was building a successful business, she was actually creating something that will last for generations. Our cousin Jennifer, whose wedding had been the scene of our family drama, listened with amazement as Marcus described the transformation of his dealership into part of our restoration partnership. The most important lesson I learned is that success comes in many different forms, Marcus said. Erica chose to build something meaningful rather than simply pursuing the largest possible income, and she succeeded beyond anything I ever imagined. I stepped forward to address our family's misconceptions about the automotive restoration industry and the significance of preserving classic vehicles for future generations. Our grandfather taught me that every old car has a story, and with enough patience and skill, you can help that story continue. I explained. The work we do is not just about fixing old machines. It is about preserving human creativity and engineering excellence. I showed photographs of restoration projects that had saved historically significant vehicles from destruction, explaining how each successful project preserved irreplaceable pieces of automotive art for future generations to appreciate and study. The Montana Ferrari project represents the pinnacle of what we hope to accomplish. I continued displaying images of the Mille Miglia winner that we would spend 18 months restoring to exact racing specifications. This car is not just valuable, it is a piece of history that tells the story of human ambition and achievement. Marcus took over the presentation to describe our business partnership and how combining restoration expertise with luxury retail services had created opportunities that neither of us could have achieved individually. The partnership has already generated interest from collectors and institutions around the world, Marcus explained. We have restoration contracts worth over $8 million and waiting lists that extend 3 years into the future. Our family listened with growing amazement as they learned about Barrett-Jackson consignments, classic car magazine features, and client relationships with collectors whose names they recognized from business publications and entertainment industry news. But the most important thing we've accomplished is learning to support each other's dreams, rather than competing or criticizing, I said, looking directly at Marcus with genuine affection and respect. Family bonds are more valuable than any car collection or business success. Marcus added, understanding that our reconciliation had been more important than any financial achievement. Our mother, Patricia, smiled with satisfaction as she watched her children finally working together toward common goals while respecting each other's expertise and contributions. Your grandfather would be extraordinarily proud of what you have built together. Patricia said, her voice filled with emotion. He always believed that family collaboration would be more powerful than individual competition. As the evening continued, family members who had never understood my passion for automotive restoration began to appreciate the artistry, craftsmanship, and historical significance of preserving rare vehicles. They examined photographs of before and after transformations that seemed to border on the miraculous. This 1938 Talbot Lago was buried under a collapsed barn for 20 years. I explained, showing images of a restoration that had required 14 months of painstaking work. The insurance company considered it a total loss, but we saw it as an opportunity to preserve one of the most beautiful cars ever designed. The completed restoration had won Best in Class at the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance and sold for $2.4 million to a collector who planned to display it in a private automotive museum. Each successful project proves that beautiful things are worth preserving rather than simply discarding when they become inconvenient. I continued thinking about how this principle applied to family relationships as well as classic automobiles. Marcus concluded our presentation by addressing the broader life lessons that our experience had taught both of us. The most important thing I learned is that judging others based on appearances or assumptions is both unfair and unwise, Marcus said. Erica was building something remarkable while I was criticizing her for not conforming to my narrow expectations. He described how discovering my success had forced him to reconsider his own values and priorities, leading to a more mature understanding of what constitutes meaningful achievement. True success is not about impressing others or accumulating status symbols, Marcus continued. It is about building something lasting that reflects your values and contributes positively to the world. I nodded in agreement, understanding that our partnership had succeeded because we had learned to respect each other's expertise while working toward shared goals that honored our grandfather's legacy. We hope our story encourages everyone to support each other's dreams rather than competing or criticizing, I said, looking around the room at family members who had their own aspirations and challenges. The most beautiful restorations happen when people work together with patience, respect, and shared commitment to excellence. As our family celebration continued into the evening, Marcus and I drove our vehicles from my collection to show relatives the fruits of years of dedication to automotive preservation. I chose the 1967 Shelby Cobra, its racing blue paint gleaming under the streetlights as we pulled into my driveway. Marcus had selected our father's 1969 Chevelle, now fully restored to the specifications Dad had dreamed about for 20 years. The car's rally green paint and chrome bumpers reflected the garage lighting as Marcus parked it next to my Honda, which still served as my daily driver, and reminder that appearances can be deceiving. The beat-up Honda taught me more about success than any luxury car ever could. I told our family as they admired the contrast between my practical daily driver and the million-dollar classics surrounding it. It reminded me every day that true value comes from what you accomplish, not what you display to impress others. I continued. Grandpa Joe drove a rusty pickup truck while building one of the finest restoration businesses in the Midwest. Marcus added his own reflection about learning to look beyond surface appearances when evaluating success achievement and the choices that family members make in pursuing their dreams. Erica taught me that the most successful people often choose to live modestly while building something meaningful behind the scenes. Marcus said, "True wealth comes from doing work that you love while contributing positively to the world around you." As our family gathering concluded, relatives who had arrived expecting to hear about business partnerships left with a deeper understanding of the importance of supporting each other's dreams and respecting different definitions of success. "The most beautiful thing you have restored is your relationship with each other," our Aunt Florence observed as she prepared to leave. "Family harmony is more valuable than any classic car collection." Marcus and I smiled at each other, understanding that our partnership had accomplished far more than business success or financial gain. We had discovered the importance of family collaboration, mutual respect, and the courage to pursue meaningful work rather than simply chasing conventional markers of achievement. Grandpa Joe's greatest restoration project was bringing his family back together. I said, thinking about how his carefully planned inheritance had guided us toward reconciliation and collaboration. The most important lesson we can share is that it is never too late to apologize, learn from mistakes, and build something beautiful together. Marcus added his voice filled with gratitude for the second chance we had been given to appreciate each other's gifts. As I locked my garage and turned off the lights illuminating our grandfather's collection, I reflected on the journey that had brought us from family conflict to business partnership and personal reconciliation. The rusty Honda that had sparked Marcus's criticism still sat in its designated bay, serving as a permanent reminder that true success often hides behind humble appearances. The car that embarrassed my brother became the catalyst for discovering what really matters in life. I said to myself, understanding that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from unexpected sources. Our story had become a testament to the power of patience, perseverance, and the courage to pursue meaningful work regardless of others' opinions or expectations. Most importantly, it demonstrated that family relationships are worth more than any material success, and that mutual respect and collaboration can accomplish far more than individual competition. What does success mean to you, and have you ever discovered that your assumptions about someone's achievements were completely wrong? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more inspiring stories about family perseverance and finding your true calling. Don't forget to share this with someone who might need encouragement to pursue their dreams regardless of what others think. Remember, the most beautiful restorations in life often happen when we learn to see past surface appearances and appreciate the remarkable work being done behind the scenes. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and may you find the courage to pursue your passions while supporting the dreams of those you love.